Hi, I'm Dr. Jaya Kanikar and welcome back to Mind Matters. In our last video, we spoke about stress, what is eustress, what is distress, and how distress affects us and how eustress is actually good for us. Today's video is going to be about how distress can lead to a mental illness in certain individuals, why it causes mental illness only in certain individuals and not in other individuals, and what actually happens, what is the pathway from stress to a mental illness. So most of us have some genetic vulnerabilities which is because of the genes or genetic abnormalities that we have, and because of certain life events or traumatic stressors that we experience. Now, this does not mean that everyone who has a genetic vulnerability is going to land up in a mental illness. In the same way, not everyone who goes through traumatic life events lands up in a mental illness. So, only when the person who has a genetic vulnerability experiences stresses which are way beyond the coping ability of that individual, that is when a mental illness will develop. Okay, when we are talking about traumatic stresses that lead to mental illness, we are talking about major life stresses. We're talking about instances like some traumatic childhood events, whether it is divorce of the parents, whether it is excessive stressors regarding education or finances, whether it is abuse, or as you grow up, whether it is relationship breakups, whether it is loss of a loved one, financial stressors, any major emotional stressor that a person goes through. In addition to that, there can also be biological stressors like certain viruses, toxins, chronic diseases. All of these can lead to a mental illness. Okay. Now, say we consider a mentally healthy individual. When we consider the genome of a mentally healthy individual, which means this individual does not have any genetic predisposition to a mental illness. Okay. When this individual experiences any traumatic stress, our brain has certain adaptive mechanisms. So there will be activation of these adaptive mechanisms in our brain, and that individual will be able to handle this traumatic stress in a way that they do not develop symptoms of any mental illness. Okay. Now suppose you consider somebody who has a genetic vulnerability. So this person has a predisposition to develop a mental illness. Now this person goes through some amount of traumatic stress. If it is not very extensive, if it is not really chronic, or if it is the first time, say, this person's brain can still activate those pathways and the person can handle the stress. Now in this case, what happens? Adaptation pathways in the brain, they will be overactivated, which means that for a while the person's brain and the body will go through a lot of stress, but it will not be enough to present as a mental illness. So outwardly you will not see any symptoms of mental illness, even though the neurons have been overactive to handle the stress. So this happens when it is one time. But suppose this happens multiple times. Multiple times this person who has a predisposition faces certain traumatic life stresses. There will come a point where this overactivation will not compensate for the amount of stress the person is going through. And that is when the person will show symptoms of a mental illness. Okay, that is how we see that certain individuals will not show any signs of mental illness because they have a mentally healthy genome. Certain individuals, even though they have a predisposition, will not show signs because it is the first time or second time that they are going through a traumatic life stressor, or they may still be able to cope with it. And certain individuals, when they have gone and experienced a stressor beyond their coping abilities, they will develop a mental illness. To better explain this to you, let me give you an example of a suspension bridge. Okay, so you have a suspension bridge, it has cables, the cables are really strong, they are able to perform their function perfectly, and they are able to manage all the loads that go through that bridge, whether it's a light motor vehicle, whether it's a heavy motor vehicle, multiple heavy motor vehicles, everything is managed really well. Now suppose you consider a bridge where one of the cables is faulty. Okay, this bridge will still be able to handle that stress. The other cables will compensate for it, and even though one cable is faulty, they will still be able to manage. Suppose two cables are faulty, the bridge can still manage. It may be a little wobbly when there are too many heavy motor vehicles passing through, but it is still okay. Now you consider a bridge where multiple cables are broken. This bridge may be able to handle certain really low motor vehicles, but it will definitely not be able to handle when a heavy motor vehicle goes through. So this is exactly what happens in an individual who has a genetic predisposition and goes through multiple life stressors and ultimately shows symptoms of a mental illness. This is important because we need to be really empathetic towards somebody who is going through a mental illness. And we should not be dismissive of their stressors. Like many a times we feel this stressor, everyone goes through this stressor, or I went through this similar stressor and I never experienced anything like this, or this is so common, everybody goes through this, why are you reacting in this way? How come you have a mental illness when other people have really sailed through these same experiences? So we have to understand that certain individuals are more vulnerable. They may not be able to handle stresses in which we or other people we know may be able to handle. So we need to be definitely more empathetic towards these individuals. So in the next video, we are going to talk about the coping skills that certain individuals we can develop before the stresses set in, so that when we are experiencing life stresses, we are more ready for it. We can build up our mental emotional resilience to deal with certain life stresses. I hope you have liked this video. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post below. And if you want me to talk about any topic in particular, please let me know. Thank you. Have a good day.